There's a song called People Pleaser by, I believe her name is Andy Allo. I think she's a Cameroonian singer. It's kind of like going in my head right now. It's a little bop. People Pleaser. All right. I play it, but I don't want to get a copyright strike. It's very appropriate for the subject. You may consider yourself to be a generous giver, but might you in fact be a people pleaser? Someone who is addicted to other people's approval. Hi, I'm Keisha Dent. I'm a certified hypnotherapist. And if you spent decades exhausting yourself, trying to please other people, trying to earn love, but making yourself indispensable to everyone and everything around you, we are going to talk about that today. So the first thing I want to say is if you feel or suspect that you may have an issue being a people pleaser, giving away your time and your energy to everyone but yourself, I want to say you're not alone. And this even is something that I myself feel as though I have struggled with and continue to struggle with to this day. Not only am I a woman, and in our society, I do believe that so many of us are regulated and pushed and corralled into people-pleasing roles and support roles. But I also seem to have the personality for it. It just seems to be someone, I seem to have always been someone who wants to make people smile. I want to make people feel good. And it's so deep. It's even in my astrology natal chart. Like if you're someone who is into astrology or at least interested or at least thinks it's fun or funny, it shows up there too as one of the main energies of being a very other focused person, a very other focused entity who likes to give my power away naturally if I don't push back. And so I bring this up to say that this is something that is a part of a lot of our personalities and is something that needs continual work often as we move throughout our lives. And the first thing we're going to do is stop calling it, just being nice, calling it generous. We're going to call it what it really is. It's an addiction to being needed, right? And when we do too much and give away too much of this, it will slowly kill your soul. So often, if this is something that shows up in your life, you'll tell yourself, right? You're just naturally giving, that you just love helping other people, that it just makes you feel so good to be useful. But if it makes you feel so good, why often in the end does it feel exhausting, belittling, diminishing, infuriating, empty? The truth is that you give until it hurts because you're terrified of what happens if you stop. You have anxious thoughts that actually often run beneath the surface that ask, will they still love me if I'm not constantly sacrificing myself? Will they still need me if I'm not constantly martyring myself for their comfort? Here's what's really happening. Your giving has become a sophisticated form of control. You give so that they'll owe you, they'll stay with you, they'll need you. But here's the cool irony of all this. The more you give from this place of desperation, of quid pro quo, right? The less people actually will respect you. And I know I've experienced this. There's a difference between being useful and being valued, between being needed and actually loved for who you are beneath all of the doing, right? And just like any addiction or any addictive behavior, the tolerance builds and it builds. And then you have to give more and more to get the same hit of feeling valuable. This shows up in all sorts of ways, in our work, in our career, in our income, in our relationships, in our health, and how we treat our bodies. At midlife, you're looking around wondering, Well, who am I if I'm not constantly serving everyone else? What's my worth beyond what I can do for other people? People pleasing behavior often stems from a fear of rejection. And this is a very, very powerful fear that lies at the core of a lot of our behavior. This is something that has been ingrained within us as a survival mechanism, not only in an ancestral lines back when, especially when earlier times when the tribe was everything, when the world was not the safe, known, easily Googled situation that it is now, but back when it was full of constant danger. The tribe was everything. A rejection by the tribe is a death sentence. Not only that, but when we're young, when we're completely vulnerable as infants, as children, reliance on the family unit is everything, and that's how we survive. Children that get rejected by their family, they don't make it. Your mind has convinced itself that constant giving equals guaranteed love. It believes that if you stop being indispensable, people will abandon you. So your nervous system, treats saying no and putting up any sort of boundaries or restrictions like a life or death situation. The people-pleasing mind genuinely believes that sacrificing yourself is protecting everything. The problem is, of course, that it's creating situations based on utility, not authentic connection. And real giving comes from overflow, not from emptiness. Real generosity is a choice. It should not be a compulsion driven by fear. This is the basis of a lot of unhappiness, a lot of lack of fulfillment. That exhaustion, that emptiness, that anger, the resentment, the bitterness, that comes not from really giving too much per se. It's from giving from the wrong place, with the wrong energy. So when you give to get, you're always operating from a deficit, always needing something back to feel okay about yourself. So where does this behavior even come from? Well, it can happen in form a few ways. And it often can develop from trauma, obviously, from childhood neglect or love that was given conditionally in exchange for certain behavior. Like, it's one possible way is your caregivers could have only showed affection when you were good, when you were helpful. And perhaps you learned that your emotional needs were inconvenient, right? Anytime you brought up something that you needed, you were attacked for it, you were demonized, you were neglected, you were called bad. So you began to adapt to this by making yourself useful instead of vulnerable. This also can happen when, as a child, we're given a lot of responsibility early on, often too early on. We have to take care of perhaps siblings or even parents at a very early age. And often, of course, are praised for this or given attention for this. For many women, this pattern is also rooted in generational trauma, generational conditioning. For centuries, women's survival literally depended on being agreeable, liked, and useful to men. Laws were put into place that prevented women from owning property, from voting, from having their own credit, from even keeping their own children if they displeased their husbands, even from protecting their own physical bodies and livelihoods if they displeased their husband. For example, famously, there often were laws on the books where a woman could be beaten by a certain size of a rod legally if she displeased her husband. Horrifying. And of course, this survival strategy got passed down through generations, encoded in our nervous systems, woman after woman after woman. Even today, societal expectations still reward women for self-sacrifice while punishing us for having boundaries. We're called selfish often for prioritizing our own needs. We're called difficult for speaking up. We're called cold and all sorts of words, short words, right, for not being endlessly nurturing. And these messages reinforce the trauma pattern that our worth comes from. And it determines what we give who we are, who we're not, how we feel inside. It begins to shape that and begins to reward certain behaviors that support society's plan and punish other ones that don't. People pleasing, especially for women, it isn't just personal. It's generational, it's cultural, it's political, and it's deeply embedded in how society has conditioned women to survive. So how do we learn to manage, overcome people pleasing habits, but still be nice? Because being nice is very nice. And my God, is that needed right now these days? Step number one is to acknowledge the real function. So recognize that your people pleasing isn't about being kind. It's about managing your anxiety about rejection. Okay, so thank your mind for trying to keep you safe, because that's what one of its main jobs is. It's always looking to do that. But also acknowledge that this strategy is no longer working. There was a time when you actually were vulnerable, when you were young, when you were a baby, when you were a kid, when it was super, super important to not be rejected. But things have changed. You now don't have that same vulnerability. You are grown, you're an adult, you're strong, you're big, and you don't need to worry about being rejected and thrown out of the cave and to your own death. Number two is to identify your approval sources. So write down who you're constantly trying to please and what you may be hoping to get from them. And notice the pattern, right? You're outsourcing your self-worth to people who may not even realize the transaction that you're creating in your own head. And sometimes this may be very conscious and overt, and you may be aware of it, but you may be surprised when you really just spend some time thinking why you're overgiving to a certain person. It may bring up things that you don't even realize, certain needs that you don't even realize that you're needing. Number three is to practice micro boundaries. So literally start small. Say things like, let me think about it, or I'll get back to you, instead of an automatic yes. Take 24 hours before responding to requests, right? And these tiny little pauses may not sound like much, but they help you to distinguish between authentic desire. These tiny pauses help you to distinguish between authentic desire to help and compulsive people pleasing. Number four is to reconnect with your authentic desires. Ask yourself, what would I want if I wasn't afraid of disappointing anyone? Because your authentic self often gets buried under decades of this conditioning, of this people pleasing, of this perpetual support role behavior, right? And that authentic self, she's still there and she's ready and waiting to be rediscovered. Step number five is to give from overflow. So true generosity happens when your own cup is full, as they say, right? You want to make sure you have oxygen for yourself before helping the other person. Start filling your own emotional tank first. And when you give from abundance rather than emptiness, both you and others will benefit more. Remember that you can be kind without being compliant. You can be generous without being exploited. Setting boundaries isn't mean, it's healthy, it's necessary for authentic relationships and a happy life experience. So if you're ready to stop being useful and start being valued, if you're tired of relationships built on what you can do instead of who you are, I want to help you reclaim your authentic self. So this pattern isn't just about boundaries. It's about a complete identity transformation. The woman who emerges from breaking this addiction, this habit, is so connected to her own worth, so connected to her own purpose that she becomes unrecognizable to those who knew her before. Through the midlife metamorphosis method, we don't just teach you to say no. We help you to reconnect with the woman you were before you learned that your value was tied to your usefulness. We work at the subconscious level, where these patterns were formed, addressing both personal and generational and cultural trauma to create lasting change. If something in this message has touched that place in you that knows there's more, that knows you want to change, that knows that there have to be some tweaks made, if you're ready to discover who you are beyond what you do for everyone and everybody else, then send me a message. You can send a DM with Authentic Self, and let's explore if this is your moment to reclaim your life. Remember always that your worth isn't earned through service. It's inherent in your very existence. The woman you're meant to become in the second half of your life is waiting for you to finally choose yourself. Again, my name is Keisha Dent. I am a certified hypnotherapist, and I want to remind you always, in order to change your life, you must first change yourself. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time.